on, but I don't think it was quite all the way over. So at any rate, to look then at the rise of what's called dominion theology within some segments of Christian nationalism. So my hope is to at least get us to that second point here today. But I want to back up a little bit. And of course, you know me. I want to start with a pop quiz. The U.S. Constitution mentions religion only in one place. Where is it, and what does it say? Before the First Amendment, in the body of the Constitution, Article 6, there shall be no religious tests for federal office. That's the only place within the body of the Constitution that religion is mentioned. And then, of course, the First Amendment, which was added along with the Bill of Rights in 1791, has the two religion clauses in it, that Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. And we learned that establishment meant what? Taxes. First of all, a religious group that is supported by the government and supported through taxes, generally taken from everyone. So if you lived, remember we talked a bit about the rise of the idea of the nation state after the Peace of Westphalia, and the idea that whoever the prince was, whoever the ruler was, got to decide what the religion of that area was going to be. So if you live, for example, in Bavaria, in what's now Germany, very heavily Catholic, your tax monies would have been collected and given then to the Catholic Church, whether you wanted them to be or not, right? So one thing, support by the government, specifically in the support of taxes. And then secondly, what did this entail then for those who might not be part of that established religion? They went to Rhode Island. They did in this country. As they were labeled either as, well, depending on the severity of the ruler, they could be heretics, or usually they were labeled as dissenters in some way, and either had to register with the government as that, or were always in some tension with the larger government. John Locke is the one in England who comes along and says the government should recognize every religion. The government should not be in the religion business. Well, there's one exception. The Catholics. Although he wouldn't have considered atheism a religion, but he did say that, you know, most people believe in God, of course, so that's not so much an issue, but Catholics. Why? Because they're really, they owe allegiance to a foreign prince, he said. Otherwise, we should allow everything. You can still have an established religion, but we must exercise then, he said, toleration. Toleration. The government should extend toleration. And again, that sounds like a very good thing to do, but if the government can extend toleration, what else can it do? It can take it away, absolutely. So, yes, if I know how to do that. Let's see. I can't there. Okay. Keep talking. Let's see. You don't have to call me Dr. Payne. You can call me the Grand High Exalted. No. You can call me Roger. Is that a little better? Okay. All right. But the Establishment Clause then, which forbid Congress from establishing really a federal religion, right? States could still establish a religion, and some of them did. Massachusetts and Connecticut being the two states that held on the longest to having an established church. In this case, it was the Congregational Church, that which came from Puritanism. And you remember we talked a little bit about Puritanism last week, the idea that the Puritans really had an idea of establishing a Christian commonwealth, as they called it. And when you had a dissenter come along like Roger Williams, who said government should be out of the religion business, where do they send him? Rhode Island. Right, so that sort of quick review, and I didn't give you many pop quiz questions, did I? We'll have to come back to that. At any rate, Why is it that Williams, here's a question. Why is it that Williams says government should not have a role in religion? What is the most important thing about religion for Williams? That it come from where? Well, from God initially, but how do you know that you're practicing? You remember his idea of soul liberty, right? Or the conscience. Williams represents, I'm actually going to write on the board today, somewhere. Williams represents a position that we historically call pietism. Pietism. In the context of the 18th century, even the late 17th century, when Williams was around, pietism was the claim made by some Christian groups that, particularly following the wars of religion that we talked about last time, that led to the Peace of Westphalia, how do we prevent religious people from killing one another? Well, we relocate religion from an obligation of the government, the pietists would argue, to the individual, to the heart. Pietism is a religion of the heart. It is a religion of experience, religious experience. How can the government control that? In fact, this is what Williams says. When you make the magistrate, which was a kind of general word for a political ruler at the time, when you make the magistrate responsible for determining what is authentic religious experience and what is not, you got some problems, right? So in fact, in the first use we know of this metaphor, Williams said it's like there has to be a wall between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the state, right? Why? Because when you break down that wall, which goes where? Does the wilderness invade the garden, or does the garden spread out and it's the wilderness. Once you break down that wall, he said, and government comes in, again, you make the magistrate responsible for what is acceptable or unacceptable religion, what is to be tolerated, what is not. And if religion is really of the individual, of the heart, of whatever experience you deem, and remember again, we read from Williams last week, even if that experience is Jewish, Islamic, or as he put it, paganist, the government doesn't have the right to step in and say that's an invalid experience, right? So this is the position of pietism. It was a very, very small movement in the 17th and into the 18th century, but a very, very influential one. Why? Because as establishment begins to come under fire, in, excuse me, in the various states, beginning in Virginia, where people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison begin to argue that the colony of Virginia and later then the state of Virginia should not have an established church. They did have one. Anybody know what it was? Anglican Church. At one time or another, every Southern colony from Maryland south, did you know that Maryland was in the South? Mason-Dixon line is the northern boundary of, so anyway, it's always a trivia question you can trip up somebody with. Baltimore is not a Southern city, but but anyway, all of the states from Maryland south, all of the colonies, excuse me, had an established Anglican church. The Virginians under Jefferson wanted to get rid of it, wanted to disestablish the church. The Anglicans, of course, in Virginia fought this fiercely. Why? Money. What happens when the church is disestablished, when you no longer get the funding from the taxes? We have to start appealing to people. And we're unprepared to do that. The largest church in the Southern colonies by far, because it was established, was the Anglican Church. Up in New England, and again, Massachusetts and Connecticut hang on to this, It's the Congregational church, that church which comes from Puritanism. Anybody in here trace your roots back to New Jersey or Pennsylvania? Those places were a mess. The middle colonies, as they are called, attract all sorts of folks. Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods, of course, established by the Quaker William Penn, who now sells oatmeal, but established by William Penn, again, as what he called a holy experiment of allowing any religion to come into Pennsylvania and set up its own colony. Right? So the middle colonies were filled with various Quaker groups, with Presbyterians, and some other really strange Christian groups. But anyway, think when you're at the constitutional, I'll get it here in a minute. When you're at the Constitutional Convention and the delegates there are saying, what church should we establish? Which one are you going to choose? Going to make the Southern colonies happy and choose Anglicanism? You're going to make the New England colonies happy and choose Congregationalism? You're going to make nobody happy and choose Presbyterianism or Quakerism? In fact, the largest groups during the colonial era were the Congregationalists, obviously, the Anglicans, and the Quakers. When the Constitution is written, those are the three largest groups in this country, three largest religions. By 1830, they were no longer the largest religions. Disestablishment in the various states, including, again, starting in Virginia, with Jefferson's bill for religious liberty, right? Liberty. What does liberty mean? It means what it says. It's not toleration, right? It's liberty. That second clause in the First Amendment, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Religious liberty, let people follow their own heart. Well, now Jefferson didn't say that. He was not one for religious experience. Rather, he said, religion should appeal to the head. You should rationally choose which religion suits you best. And for Jefferson, it was none of the above. He called himself one time a sect unto himself. None of the above count. But whatever appeals to you rationally, you choose that religion. The government, again, should not have any say. So you had the pietist arguing for this heart religion. You had the rationalist, such as Jefferson, arguing for this position of religion appealing to the head. And so when we read that clause of the First Amendment, as the great American religious historian Sidney Mead pointed out, it was a time when pietism and rationalism, in terms of religion, specifically forms of Christianity, married. They both had the same goal: disestablishment of an established church and religious liberty for all. In fact, among Jefferson's most ardent supporters, and Jefferson, again, was well known as a free thinker, as it was called then, an infidel. I had a student once at LSU tell me, you keep saying this about Jefferson, don't you know he was the one who put the words of Jesus in red in the Bible? You ever seen one of those Bibles, it's got the words of Jesus in red? I said, no, you're a little confused. What Jefferson did was he went through the Bible with a pair of scissors, and he clipped out all of the things that he said do not appeal to rationalism, miracles, talk about sons of God and all of this. He wrote to his friend Joseph Priestley, who discovered oxygen. Aren't you glad he did? Wrote to his friend Joseph Priestley, and he says, here's my project I'm working on. I'm identifying the true words of Jesus, And Priestley wrote back and said, "How do you know?" And Jefferson said, "It's like finding diamonds in a dunghill." Congress used to give out copies of the Jefferson Bible until about the 1950s, when someone pointed out it's a little different than, the Bible you can go pick up at a bookstore. So, but anyway, the point is Jefferson was well known for all of this. Yet who were his strongest supporters? The pietists, the heart religion folks, because they saw in Jefferson's rationalism, again, a similarity of ideas. Government should stay out of religion. There should be no established church. We should be free to practice religious liberty. So there should be no Christian nation, no Jewish nation. In fact, they point to the Old Testament and say, see, even that doesn't exist anymore. Even the old religious nation of the Jews. So God obviously wants us to be free to practice and pursue religion, again, whether it appeals to the heart or to the head. In fact, a Baptist minister in Massachusetts by the name of John Leyland was such a Jefferson fan that when, after 1800, Jefferson won a very, very bitter election for president against John Adams. And a lot of what went on during that election was that people were saying Jefferson was an infidel, right? Well, who voted for him? The pietists. And John Leyland, a Baptist, a pietist. The Baptists were built upon this idea, right? John Leyland has made for Jefferson the largest piece of cheese that has ever been gifted to a president. He took the milk from some 600 to 900 cows in Massachusetts and made a huge 1,237 or something like that pound hoop of cheese, and sent it to Jefferson to celebrate his victory in 1800 as president. So there. I wish I had thought of that. All right, yes, next time I'm teaching this in class. What's that? Oh, the comment was it had to be Swiss cheese since it was holy. So, yes, we're getting some laughs here. Not clear, broken in.
The Baptists.
Oh, the Baptists, yes. No. The main two groups of Baptists at the time were the general and the regular. And it had to do primarily with how much they bought into Calvinist predestination. The regular Baptists, I think I've got this right. If not, it's the other way around. But I think the regular Baptists were the ones who held that people, of course, are predestined for heaven or hell. There's nothing you can do to change that. And so things like missionary activities and things of that nature were useless. And from them come the anti-missionary Baptist churches and the hard shell Baptist. Most people think hard shell means that they're just very, very conservative. They're actually hard shell because of this idea that missionary activity is not worthwhile. The regular Baptists then, no, the general Baptist, sort of buy into this pietism idea that however God chooses individuals for salvation, he communicates it through religious experience. In fact, the pietist movement you may be familiar with another group, sort of the last blossoming of pietism in England in the 18th century, when there was a fellow who went to a Moravian service one night and said he felt his heart strangely warmed. For those of you who don't know who it was John Wesley. Methodism began as a pietistic movement within the Anglican Church, right? Is your hand, or no, is your heart as my heart? Then give me your hand, Wesley said, right? Again, when the Constitution is written, there are three main Christian groups: the Anglicans, the Congregationalists, the Quakers. By 1830, there are three large Christian groups, all of them coming out of pietism. The Baptist, primarily the General Baptist. You know, if you don't believe in missions, you tend not to grow very much. Of course, like the Shakers, if you don't believe in procreation, sex. Okay, somebody else said it. You don't have any of that internal growth either. So this is why every now and then they find the last little living Shaker sister somewhere in New England or something. But so the General Baptists who accept this idea, the New Light Presbyterians who accept this idea, which of course means that there were some old light Presbyterians who did not. So the Presbyterians are kind of split here between a more pietistic definition or really more of a kind of established idea, right? Because remember, that group that came to Lincoln that I talked about last week were Presbyterian ministers wanting him to rewrite the preamble to the Constitution to recognize this as a Christian country, because they said, this is why we're losing the war. This is why the Union is losing the war. We don't recognize God. And you thought I'd forgotten about that story, didn't you? According to various sources, you know, there are lots of Lincoln stories and everything. According to various sources, Lincoln received them politely. And in one source, it says when he had finished talking with them, he said, "I appreciate you coming, gentlemen. However, I would think that if God Almighty wanted to communicate something this important to me, he would have done it directly rather than deputizing you all to come." However, they thought they had been encouraged enough that they came back 2 years later and brought along a rewritten Christian preamble that they wanted to, of course, replace the preamble of the Constitution with. And it didn't happen. They, in fact, in the 2-year period, they reorganized themselves into a group called the National Reform Association. Yes, the NRA. Different one. The National Reform Association, and every few years they would find a senator or congressman to introduce a bill which was called the Christian Amendment Bill that would rewrite the preamble in specifically Christian terms. How long did this effort last? Until the 1950s, when the National Reform Association finally disbanded. Why? Because they were happy with the era that we call piety along the Potomac, when Dwight D. Eisenhower, under the influence of the Catholic Knights of Columbus, had added to U.S. currency "In God We Trust." Now, it had appeared on some currency before. In fact, during the Civil War, it appeared on the 2-cent piece as kind of a sop to those who wanted more Christianity. But it appears on all money since about 1956, I think it is, 54, 56. And then, of course, to the Pledge of Allegiance, the addition of the words "under God." And so the National Reform Association was happy that you know, they had accomplished this much. And Eisenhower himself said, you know, religion is an important thing, but it's not important what religion you are. It's just important if you are an American and you're religious as a part of the American way of life. Some of you may be old enough, I'm stepping out on a limb here, some of you may be old enough to remember back in the late 50s and early 60s, the ad campaign, "Attend the church or synagogue of your choice," right? Attend the church or synagogue of your choice. So Jews are sort of embraced for the first time by kind of national consensus. Catholics, who had ever since the founding of the country really been under suspicion Again, John Locke's old, you can't trust the Catholics. Catholics are embraced. A Catholic is elected president in John F. Kennedy. And Eisenhower himself took note of this and said, our country makes no sense, our system of government makes no sense unless it is founded upon religion. And I don't care what it is. Being religious was a good thing, right? 5 minutes left, about 45 minutes worth of stuff left here. But let's see if we can at least draw some conclusions here today. I mentioned Sidney Meade, the great American religious historian at the University of Iowa for many years, which was the first state university in this country to offer study in religion, as opposed to denominational universities and colleges offering studies in theology. Right. So Sidney Meade was at the University of Iowa, one of the very first scholars of looking at American religion and some of these things. And he made the very interesting observation that during the the constitutional period, pietism by 1830, meaning primarily the Baptists, the Methodists, and the New Light Presbyterians. But even before that time, pietism married rationalism, and they gave birth to the separation of church and state and religious liberty, the two parts of the First Amendment, the two clauses of the First Amendment. Then pietism recognized what a mistake this had been, and they arranged for a hasty divorce and remarried traditional Protestantism. But during this particular time period, when, again, the Constitution is being written, when the First Amendment is being written, these two are allies in these ideas. Government should not be in the religion business. Therefore, can you have a religious government? Jefferson was one of the more vocal voices on this, vocal voices, nothing circular about that. One of the most prominent voices on this, in which he argued, of course, it makes no difference to me whether my neighbor believes in one God or 30 gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg, he said. And later then, I firmly believe, he said, if there had never been a priest, there would have never been a heretic. Right? So is Jefferson opposed to Christianity? No. He considers himself a Christian, a good Christian, because he's gone through the Bible and knows exactly what Jesus said. Right? Is the Constitution anti-Christian? No, certainly not. Is it secular? No. What? Well, there's a dichotomy here, right? Either you're religious or you're secular. The Constitution is religiously neutral. Government takes no stand on this. As one of the first cases to make it to the U.S. Supreme Court on the religion clauses, Salmon P. Chase, who had been the former Treasury Secretary, was Chief Justice, and he issues a ruling saying the law knows no heresy. The law knows no heresy, right? It's not that the Constitution is secular. There's a secular constitution in France where they pass laws saying you cannot appear in public with a hijab. That was a law that was passed less than 10 years ago. But also, you cannot attend public school in France wearing a necklace that has a Star of David on it, a crescent, or a cross, or a crucifix. Secularity. We enforce this total divorce of religion from French life. Religion is fine in your private life, but it is left out of the government. That's not what our Constitution says. Yes, sir.
In France, are they not to wear a necklace that has a
Yes, but I wouldn't put it too close to their head. Uh, But interestingly, although things have been changing significantly under Erdogan, Turkey, when it became a modern nation state after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Turkey had a very secular constitution. And Mustafa Kemal, who became known as Ataturk, the father of the Turks, passed a famous hat law, it was called, saying that males could not wear the fez. You know what a fez is, the little trapezoidal looking hat, which had been developed so that Muslim men, when it came time to pray during the day, wherever they were, they could do their prayer postures and touch their forehead to the ground without having a bill on their hat. That's where the fez comes from. And Ataturk outlaws the fez, said if you're male, you have to wear a hat with a brim on it, whether you're Muslim or not. If you're female, you cannot wear the hijab. And of course, there's a lot of pushback going on now in Turkey over some of this with Erdogan, who's a much more conservative Muslim political figure. But those are secular constitutions. The US is simply religiously neutral. And thank goodness, this means we have figured it all out. A case does not ever appear before the Supreme Court where people say my religious liberties have been denied or whatever. At any rate, I see I'm out of town, and did I even use the word Christian nationalist here today? Maybe another round in a few weeks here, if you're interested. But yes. I will say this, that really it's, first of all, Christian nationalism, like about anything, is not one thing. There are many different degrees of it. And being a proud American and a dedicated Christian is not Christian nationalism, right? Rather, Christian, well, I will say this, and in fact, I can send this to Hugh and if he wants to distribute it. But just last month, the Public Research Council on Religion, Public Research on Religion Institute, sorry, the PRRI, just last month, did a nationwide survey on Christian nationalism and asked people, let me very quickly see if I can find, ask people certain questions trying to define what it is. First of all, as I've said, the extreme wing of Christian nationalism today says that the US government must declare America a religious nation. All of our laws, therefore, should be based upon biblical and Christian, read their form of Christian values. If we do not do this, then we are in danger of seeing our nation slip away. It's a very dichotomous view, right? You're either with us or you're satanic. The whole country is going to slide into hell. Being a Christian, they said, is a very important part of being truly American. And finally, then, and this is what I've hinted at and we haven't quite gotten around to, God has therefore called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of Christian society: government, education, economics, and of course, there are many different ideas on, well, what are Christian economics? You know, Calvin didn't like people borrowing for interest and being paid back interest on money. You know, what's that going to do to capitalism? So whose economics are we talking about here? But at any rate, let's see, nearly 2/3 of those who identify as evangelical Protestants, white evangelical Protestants, qualify as either Christian nationalist sympathizers, 35% of evangelicals. 29% are adherents, meaning that they accept some of these ideas. They're also more likely than not to have anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, and anti-Muslim ideas. And in fact, some 17% of this 35% of evangelicals agreed with the statement, the United States is a white Christian nation and I am willing to fight to keep it that way. So if you have some, what's that? Yes, now that you're all upset, but anyway, yeah. So maybe in a few weeks, if you want to finish this up, let me know. Of course, as you know, if you've been here before, finishing something up is not my strong suit. So, but at any rate, thank you this morning for your attention.